October 17th, 1943, Camp Aliceville, Alabama. It's 2:47 a.m., and a German prisoner sits hunched over his tray, hands shaking, eyes locked on the food in front of him. For 3 years in the Afrika Korps, he'd lived on sawdust bread and bitter, fake coffee. Now, at just 128 pounds, he's staring down scrambled eggs, bacon, white bread, slathered with butter, real coffee, sweetened and creamed, more food than he'd seen in months. When I was captured, I weighed 128 pounds, he remembered later. After 2 years as an American prisoner, I weighed 185. I got so fat, you couldn't even see my eyes anymore. That kind of weight gain, 57 pounds, wasn't rare. It happened thousands of times in American POW camps during World War II, while their comrades back on the Eastern Front scraped by on frozen horse meat and meager, shrinking rations. These prisoners ate the same food as American troops, thanks to the Geneva Convention. Over 425,000 German prisoners ended up in camps across the United States. They didn't just get their bodies back. They saw a slice of American life that turned their old beliefs upside down. When Rommel's forces finally gave up in Tunisia in May 1943, doctors found an army on the edge of collapse. After months of supply disasters and desert fighting, soldiers who'd once been elite walked into captivity as skin and bones. The official Wehrmacht ration, Verpflegungssatz, looked good on paper, but by winter 1942, they got only a fraction of what was promised. Hard bread, if any, sometimes replaced by bug-ridden hardtack. Mornings meant ersatz coffee brewed from roasted acorns sweetened with saccharin. Lunch brought tiny tins of meat, usually horse or mule, bulked out with sawdust. Dinner was dried vegetables that filled the stomach, but didn't feed the body. Dr. James Patterson from the U.S. Army Medical Corps examined German POWs at the Oren Processing Center that May. His reports were blunt: widespread malnutrition, vitamin deficiencies, scurvy, night blindness from lack of vitamin A, and edema from not enough protein. But recovery started almost the moment they boarded Liberty ships bound for America. These ships, cranked out in record numbers, moved as many as 30,000 prisoners a month. The first meal at sea, beef stew, potatoes, white bread, butter, coffee with milk, was more than they'd eaten in a week back in Africa. Some prisoners couldn't even keep it down. Their bodies just weren't ready for real food after so much deprivation. Even the American medical staff looked on in disbelief. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison Matthews watched these men struggle up the gangplanks in Oran, hollow-cheeked, ribs poking out, some too weak to climb without help. "We had to start feeding them carefully," he said. "Their systems couldn't handle normal food right away." The Geneva Convention's Article 11 required that prisoners get food equal to what depot troops received. For the Americans, this wasn't just a rule, it was strategy. Colonel Edward Davidson spelled it out in a memo. Every well-fed German prisoner is potential insurance for American prisoners in German hands. The Provost Marshal General's office ran the whole show, tracking calories, rotating menus, running medical checks, and recording every pound gained or lost. The paperwork was endless. Camps filed forms twice a month. Swiss inspectors and the Red Cross dropped in to make sure everything was above board. The standard garrison ration was no joke. Meat, bread, potatoes, cheese, butter, milk, unlimited real coffee, plus fresh vegetables and fruit. On average, prisoners got 3,000 to 4,000 calories a day, with more available for sale at the camp commissary. They could buy cigarettes, chocolate, beer, wine, sodas, and even ice cream with scrip they earned from camp jobs or got through Geneva Convention allowances. Feeding so many people took serious coordination. Camp quartermasters had to order mountains of food, line up regional suppliers, keep cold storage running, and run kitchens around the clock. The scale was staggering, bigger than anything the German army ever attempted, and all for enemy soldiers. That German prisoner's story, gaining 57 pounds, getting so heavy his eyes practically vanished, wasn't just his. It was proof, written on thousands of bodies, of what American abundance could do. Georg Gartner, a sergeant in RML's forces who was captured in Tunisia in 1943, ended up with an odd kind of fame. People called him Hitler's last soldier in America after he managed to escape from Camp Deming, New Mexico, in September 1945. He lived as Dennis Wiles for 40 years before finally turning himself in. In 1985, in his memoir, which he wrote with historian Arnold Kramer, Gartner talked about how the POWs were blown away by their treatment in the camps. They weren't just fed, they were practically pampered, eating meals their own country couldn't dream of providing at home. Military chaplain Alex Funker, locked up at Camp Alona, Iowa, put it this way: "We all were positively impressed by the U.S. and that we all had been won over to friendly relations with the United States." After the war, Funker dug into what happened to his fellow prisoners and found something wild. Guys were gaining 40, even 60 pounds while locked up. Some put on so much weight that when they went home, their families barely recognized them. Captain William Burke, who processed German POWs returning home in 1946, said these men departed looking like professional athletes or successful businessmen, not defeated soldiers. Their families expected skeletons. Instead, they got men who looked prosperous. Camp Concordia in Kansas had about 4,000 Germans spread across hundreds of buildings on 640 acres. The place ran a huge education program, working with nearby universities to offer hundreds of courses. In the kitchens, thousands ate every day. Cooks used electric ranges, walk-in fridges, industrial mixers, and mechanical dishwashers. A lot of prisoners had never even seen this kind of technology. The camp itself was a showpiece of American organization. They built the whole thing in just 90 days. Electric lights everywhere, hot water, flush toilets, central heating. For prisoners from rural Germany, where outhouses and oil lamps were the norm, it was a whole different world. Down in Texas, Camp Hearn, locals called it the Fritz Ritz, held up to 5,000 prisoners, and they built their own rec centers and kept the industrial kitchens running day and night. Central bakeries cranked out thousands of loaves of bread, and prisoners set up regional mess halls, cooking up German dishes with whatever American ingredients they could find, meals they hadn't tasted since before the war. Colonel Donald Drake, who ran the camp, introduced a system he called calories for cooperation. If prisoners followed the rules, they got extra food, special meals, and commissary perks. Discipline problems dropped, and the average prisoner gained 45 pounds in just a year and a half. At Camp Aliceville, Alabama, the staff faced a different challenge: processing the gaunt survivors of the desert campaigns. Commanders responded with carefully planned feeding schedules. The medical team tracked their progress. Vitamin deficiencies disappeared. Dental problems got fixed up. Energy came back. Within months, those hollowed faces filled out. Major Robert Harrison, the camp's doctor, published a study after the war showing that prisoners gained weight fast at first, sometimes 20 or 30 pounds, in just 3 months, and then kept putting on a couple of pounds each month. The most striking case: a man who arrived at 109 pounds and left at 181. Camp Papago Park in Arizona held German naval officers, and they didn't have to work. They spent their days watching movies, reading, and gardening. The camp grabbed headlines in December 1944 when 25 U-boat officers tunneled out, planning to float down the Salt River to Mexico. The plan flopped. The river was dry. All of them got caught, some simply giving up when they got hungry. Even the Arizona desert had less to offer than the camp kitchens. All this special treatment for German prisoners kicked up a lot of anger back home. While these POWs ate well, American families juggled ration books and did without. Sugar, coffee, meat, butter. Civilians stood in line and counted points, but the prisoners got it all every day, no questions asked. In 1944, Dorothy Mitchell from Topeka wrote her congressman, "My 3 sons fight in Europe while German prisoners here eat steak twice weekly. I haven't seen steak since Pearl Harbor. My family's monthly meat ration is less than these Nazis eat in 3 days." How do you explain this to a mother? The government kept repeating the same line. If we treat German prisoners well, our own POWs are safer. Propaganda posters spelled it out. Their good treatment ensures ours. Radio broadcasts reminded people that 90,000 American prisoners depended on the Germans following the Geneva rules. But public anger simmered, especially when German prisoners worked on local farms and ate better than the farmers who hired them. And when you added in the country's racial tensions, the resentment only got sharper. Black American soldiers like Rhett Trimmingham saw something that cut deep. German prisoners of war, actual enemies, could sit down in restaurants that wouldn't even let Black Americans in the front door. Trimmingham wrote a famous letter to Yank magazine about watching German POWs get served in a Texas restaurant while he, wearing his uniform, combat ribbons and all, was told to go around to the kitchen for takeout. It's hard to overstate the bitterness of that. Enemy soldiers got better treatment than Americans who were risking their lives for the country. That left wounds that didn't heal fast. Even a lot of the German prisoners noticed how wrong it was. Some felt uncomfortable, benefiting from the injustice. Their camp newspapers even ran editorials calling out American segregation. So you had Nazi soldiers of all people pointing out the hypocrisy in American racial policies. On the ground, the POW labor program played a huge role in American agriculture. By 1944, over 300,000 prisoners worked the fields harvesting crops that fed both the U.S. and its allies. The program brought in millions and gave the prisoners food far better than standard camp rations. Farmers, desperate for help, tried to keep these work crews happy, sometimes competing for their labor. Mornings started with big farm breakfasts: eggs, bacon, pancakes, coffee. At noon, folks brought hot meals right out to the fields: fried chicken, mashed potatoes, vegetables, pie. In the afternoon, cold drinks and snacks kept them going. Back at camp in the evening, another big dinner awaited. Altogether, their daily calories often topped 5,000 in Nebraska's sugar beet fields. Some prisoners saw American farm machinery in action for the first time. Hans Dietrich, working near Scottsbluff, wrote home, "One American farmer with his machines does what our whole village used to do. The combine harvester processes more grain in an hour than we managed in a week by hand." Texas cotton farms relied on thousands of POWs during harvest. The work was hard, the sun relentless, but the prisoners got all the water they needed, regular meals, and extra food for those who picked the most. Wilhelm Hartmann, working near Kaufman, put on 63 pounds in 14 months. "Texas farmers fed us like prize cattle," he said. One rancher joked, "Can't get good work from hungry men. If only our officers had understood that." California's Central Valley brought its own kind of irony. POWs picked peaches, apricots, and oranges and ate as much as they wanted while they worked. But they also watched mountains of perfectly good fruit bulldozed into pits when markets were glutted. Kurt Vogel wrote, "Mountains of oranges destroyed while my family survives on turnips. I begged to send them to Germany." The farmer just shrugged. "Economically impossible." That kind of waste broke something in him. Military doctors tracked how these men changed, almost like a science experiment. Major Thomas Richardson, chief medical officer for the 8th Service Command, pulled together statistics from 50,000 exams between 1943 and 1946. He mapped out a pattern that shaped post-war nutrition science. First month, the prisoners' bodies just adjusted, no real weight gain, just learning to handle fats and proteins again. Second month, they put on weight fast, 8 to 10 pounds or so. Months 3 to 6, slower but steady, 3 or 4 pounds a month. After 6 months, gains slowed but didn't stop. Most put on 40 to 60 pounds total. Their health shot up along with their weight. Vitamin deficiencies vanished in about 3 months. Scurvy cleared up. Night blindness disappeared. Dental health improved too, over 400,000 procedures, from extractions to complicated bridge work. Many prisoners got better dental care than they'd ever had before. German doctors in camp hospitals started seeing a new problem: diseases of plenty. Dr. Friedrich Hoffmann at Camp Benair wrote, "We see diabetes in men who survived on 1,000 calories, hypertension in soldiers who once had low blood pressure from starvation, gout from rich foods. These are diseases of prosperity showing up in men who used to be starving. The mental toll matched the physical changes. Camp psychiatrists saw a lot of guilt, men putting on weight while their families back in Germany starved. Captain James Murray called it prosperity trauma, the strange distress of getting healthier while everything at home collapsed. Prisoners felt ashamed of how they looked, anxious about explaining it to their loved ones, guilty about enjoying good food while Germany suffered. Christmas 1944 made the contrast painfully clear. The Battle of the Bulge raged in Europe. German civilians survived on turnips, while American camps laid out holiday feasts bigger than anything most of these men had seen even before the war. The menus from December 24th and 25th, 1944, still sit in military archives: roast turkey and lots of it, about £1.50 for each man. Picture a table loaded with glazed ham and pineapple, mashed potatoes rich with butter and cream, sweet potato casserole, green beans swimming in sauce, cranberry jelly, fresh baked rolls still warm from the oven, pies of every kind, ice cream too. Officers got eggnog, and there was all the coffee and cocoa you could drink. These feasts went way beyond what the rations allowed. Thanks to local churches and civic groups, the Methodist Women of Hearne, Texas, baked and delivered 2,000 cookies to Camp Hearne. At Concordia, the Lutheran congregation knit scarves, one for every prisoner. Even towns struggling to feed themselves shared their meager supplies with enemy soldiers. Prisoners couldn't wrap their heads around this level of generosity. Feldwebel Richard Steinberg remembered it well. He said, "We sat before this feast knowing our families had nothing. Men wept, not from happiness, but because the contrast was too much. How could we celebrate while Germany starved? How could we reject this kindness from our enemies?" We ate in silence. Every bite felt like both a betrayal and a blessing. Despite all this, barely anyone tried to escape. Out of 425,000 prisoners, there were just 2,222 escape attempts. Almost none succeeded, except for Georg Gartner. That's a 0.5% attempt rate, the lowest of any big POW population in modern warfare. The reason was simple: the camps were safer and offered more comfort than freedom ever could. Take the famous Papago escape. 25 U-boat officers spent months digging a 178-foot tunnel with spoons, hiding the dirt in a volleyball court they'd talked the guards into letting them build. The plan? Float down the Salt River to Mexico. Problem was, the river was bone dry. Every one of them was caught within 3 weeks. Most gave themselves up when hunger set in. Years later, Captain Jürgen Wattenberg, who led the escape, saw it clearly. We were ideological idiots. Inside the camp, we had food, shelter, safety, even some fun. Outside just desert, hostility, and certain recapture, we risked everything to escape from paradise into hell. It made no sense except ideological sense, and ideology doesn't fill your stomach. Most prisoners saw the truth. Where would they even go? How would they survive? They barely spoke English, had no documents or money, and stood out everywhere. The odds were impossible. Plus, the stakes were too high. Staying in camp meant surviving. Escaping meant risking a return to combat or starving. Working near American factories, the prisoners saw something that shook them. At Campbell Soup, single lines pumped out more food in an hour than German factories managed all day. Near Detroit, they watched B-24 bombers come off the Willow Run assembly line every 63 minutes faster than Germany could build trainers. The psychological blow was huge. Otoli, an engineer from Crewe, worked near a mill that put out 10,000 tons of steel a day. He realized this isn't a war between armies, it's a war between industrial systems. They can lose 10 tanks for everyone they destroy and still win. The math made our defeat certain, no matter how brave or clever we were. The shock didn't stop with industry. American farms produced twice the yield per acre as German ones, using a fraction of the labor. One farmer with the right machines did the work of dozens back home. Irrigation, fertilizer, hybrid seeds. Prisoners from tiny subsistence farms thought the harvests here were miraculous. What stunned them most was the waste. Mountains of potatoes left to rot, grain burned, milk dumped down the drain to keep prices up. Franz Müller wrote, "They destroy food to stabilize markets while Europe starves. Only a nation with endless resources could afford waste like this." Prisoners finally understood America's real power wasn't in its armies, but in its surplus. Between 1945 and 1946, ships carried more than 370,000 German POWs back to Europe. They left America weighing millions of pounds more than when they'd arrived, living proof of American abundance. Headed home to ruins, the contrast was tragic. They returned to bombed-out cities, starving families, and suspicion. Their healthy bodies set them apart, marked them as privileged, maybe even traitors. Families couldn't believe they'd actually gained weight in captivity. While Germany starved, these men looked well-fed and people resented it. The physical reversal came fast. Military surveys showed that former POWs lost 30 to 50 pounds within 6 months of coming home. Bodies built on American rations just couldn't handle German scarcity. If they were lucky, they got 1,550 calories a day, often less. The American weight vanished. The men looked older than before they were captured. Despite the comfort of their captivity, Hinrich Weber, for example, got to Hamburg at 186 pounds, up from 134 when he was captured. 6 months later, he was back down to 138. He said the American body just couldn't survive on German rations. "I gave my food to my kids, lived off potato peels and whatever grain I could steal. It's easier to be hungry all the time than to know what it feels like to be full and then lose it." But life in the camps wasn't just about food. These places turned into makeshift universities that would help shape the Germany that came after the war. More than 50,000 prisoners signed up for classes, everything from agriculture to philosophy. At Camp Concordia alone, they offered 300 different subjects. Professors from nearby colleges came in to teach, covering topics like American history and even auto repair. The curriculum wasn't an accident. They made sure to include democracy, free markets, constitutional law, the kind of stuff you couldn't talk about in Nazi Germany. Prisoners read the Federalist Papers, Adam Smith, John Stuart Mill. They argued about which governments worked, which economies made sense, and what a social contract really meant. Minds grew even as bodies filled out. The camp newspapers changed too. What started as Nazi propaganda turned into real forums for debate. Die Ruf, the camp paper, went out to 25,000 prisoners. It ran arguments about Germany's future, the power of democracy, and how to rebuild the economy. Watching the paper transform from a mouthpiece to a democratic platform was like tracking the prisoners' own ideological journeys. Dr. Wilhelm von Braun taught physics at Camp Shelby while he was a prisoner. We had better facilities than most German universities, he said. Lab equipment, textbooks, academic freedom. Jewish professors who'd escaped Germany taught right alongside us. No hatred. That willingness to share knowledge with enemies showed the Americans' confidence in their system. The Special Projects Division ran a secret re-education program, but it didn't look like brainwashing. By 1945, 25,000 prisoners had signed up for democracy courses voluntarily. They pored over documents banned back home, talked about ideas that in Germany could get you killed. The program worked because it showed how democracy functioned instead of just preaching about it. Prisoners saw it every day. Free speech in their camp papers, Americans arguing openly about race on the radio, criticism of leaders, unthinkable in dictatorships. Every pound they gained, every meal they ate showed them that democracy meant prosperity. Some of these were die-hard Nazis, officers who'd sworn themselves to Hitler, but by the end they were helping plan a democratic Germany. Colonel Hans von Luck, who'd fought in Poland, France, and Africa, admitted, "We arrived as convinced Nazis, we left as reluctant Democrats, not because anyone brainwashed us, but because their system worked. Ours didn't. You could see it in our waistlines." About 5,000 former prisoners eventually moved to America, became citizens of the country that once locked them up. Thousands more kept up pen-pal friendships with Americans for years. These relationships, born out of the strangest circumstances, built bridges no one expected. It wasn't easy to immigrate. Back in Germany, people saw ex-prisoners as possible American sympathizers. In America, people still thought of them as the enemy, but many pushed through, pulled by memories of possibility. They scattered across the country. Hans Wehr became a doctor in Maine. Georg Gartner managed to hide in plain sight for 40 years. Love forged the strongest ties. Even though fraternization was officially forbidden, romance blossomed through letters and work details. More than 1,000 German ex-POWs married American women they met during or just after the war. Those families turned enemies into relatives, joining two worlds through love, not war. In 1985, 500 former prisoners came back for a reunion in Austin, bringing their American-born kids and grandkids. Hanska gave the keynote. "We came as enemies, left as friends, arrived starving, departed overweight. Every pound gained was a lesson in democracy. Every meal proved the power of freedom." The economics of the POW program just didn't follow the usual rules of war. Sure, it cost hundreds of millions, but the prisoners' labor in farms and factories nearly paid for itself and delivered huge strategic advantages. Every healthy, well-fed prisoner was living proof of American strength. Their bodies said it all. The program hit several targets at once. It kept American POWs safer. Germans treated captured Americans better, partly because of how the U.S. treated German prisoners. It helped solve labor shortages, with POWs harvesting crops that kept America and its allies going. Most importantly, it turned enemies into possible allies, simply by showing them what prosperity looked like. After the war, the impact was clear. Former prisoners brought American farming methods home, and within 5 years, German crop yields jumped by 30%. They brought over American management strategies, and that helped spark the Wirtschafts economic miracle. Their influence shaped a whole generation of German leaders who looked west, not east. Colonel James Patterson summed it up back in 1947. "We purchased future peace with present food. All those extra pounds millions of them, weren't just a sign of good eating. They turned American farm surpluses into political capital that paid off right through the Cold War. Think about those German POWs who put on 50 pounds or more in American camps. That's one of World War II's strangest twists. Their families back home stood in line for scraps while they picked between different dishes. Their friends starved or froze on the Eastern Front, but inside the camps, they watched movies and played soccer. It sounds almost surreal. Prisoners eating better than their supposed allies. But it worked. Their physical transformation told a bigger story. America could be generous even to its enemies, even during all-out war. Democracy didn't just win battles, it filled bellies. Freedom meant abundance. Tyranny brought only shortages. One prisoner's 57-pound gain wasn't rare. It happened thousands of times. Every extra pound was proof of America's agricultural and industrial strength. In the end, America's real power wasn't just in its weapons, but at its dinner tables. These tables were big enough to feed enemies, generous enough to turn soldiers into witnesses, and full enough to buy peace with a season of plenty. And for those German POWs, the experience was eye-opening. They realized their enemy wasn't America at all. It was the ideology that had sent them marching against a country this prosperous. Every meal chipped away at Nazi beliefs. Every full stomach showed what democracy could build. They went home heavier, yes, but changed on the inside too, carrying memories of an impossible generosity from a nation strong enough to feed even those who'd tried to destroy it.